And the meeting is hereby called to order. Thank you. Thanks for everybody for continuing to participate. We are making progress with our project and quite well. And I think we've got some interesting things to share today in what we are discussing today. And then we're going to certainly have, it'll all go to our regular Park Commission committee, which is helping to guide the Park Commission as you're helping to guide them. So with that, I'll just jump out of the way and push it to Dave and Carla, because I know they've got some stuff to say.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. With the agenda here. So this is mostly going to be Carla's show today. The meat of it is talking about process, but wanted to talk to folks a little bit about the program cost and fees. In the process of kind of going through how this might work, as everybody knows, we talked to pretty much every program that we could find for septic inspections around New York State. Jason spent quite a bit of time working on that and just kind of following the process of how these things occur from both an administrative standpoint and kind of a logistics on the ground standpoint. And the amount of work varied across the board. Some programs have the entire program administration and inspections done by one or two individuals, and some have actual inspectors that go out. And then the agency itself does program administration. For example, town of Queensbury locally has Kate Deck, organizes all the property transfer inspections. That goes to Dave Hatton and Dave's staff, and off they go. So we took a harder look at our numbers originally and sat down and said, you know, at $75 per year, what would that accomplish in terms of staffing, both administrative and inspection staffing? Originally, we were thinking we would need upwards of 3 staff to accommodate the number of inspections that may be coming, particularly in peak times, and also some in-office administrative assistants to help try to schedule these as they come in. We're looking at about 550 to 600 per year, probably on average. Taking another look at that and breaking it down, you know, the one benefit we have as the commission is we have built into our office 4 to 5 people that are a combination of office and field people. And we think that we could absorb the high season times with additional staff, myself, Joe, Jason, Roger, Justin, primarily. And if we have, you know, a typical week might be 5 to 10 inspections. If we have a week that's 20 inspections, we would offset that with existing staff and not need to go with that 3rd staff person. So that would cut down the program cost a bit. We also had the ability to say in pre and post season, perhaps April and May and October, November, we may not need the same level of staffing or even need the seasonal staffing. We might be able to do that within house. So anyway, long story short, running the numbers again, we believe that we could probably run the program well administratively and by inspection for $50 per property owner in the program, reducing that cost by about 33%. It will require more in-agency time, you know, by quite a bit. But in talking with Joe and Jason, I think we have that ability in-house to do that. So that is our current proposal right now. It's in our concept plan. We updated that to reflect a $50 annual residential fee and a $100 commercial fee. We've also been kicking around the ideas of what would each of these septic inspections entail for different types of systems. So let's say a holding tank. We've had a few people reach out and say, well, a holding tank, it simply goes from my house into this tank. I have it pumped out every couple of months and off we go. Does that really require that same level of inspection? And the short answer is no. It really wouldn't require that same level. And also, if they're getting pumped out and certified, there's value in that to the commission as well. So we're proposing that cost be halved to $25 per property with holding tank. And then lastly, we've been in some conversations locally. There's enhanced treatment units around the Lake George watershed where people that have taken that extra step to not only have their septic tank, but also have an improved system that will remove more solids and be a more functionally active system than your traditional one might be. That comes with traditionally a management system or a contractor that comes in, will pump out that tank, do maintenance on it, and essentially inspect that system. And so what I think we're currently at today, Joe can correct me if I'm wrong, is exempting those systems from the program cost and inspections themselves, as long as that property owner were to provide the requisite detail about the inspections and the pump outs as needed under the regular program. So what we're trying to do, like we have with every program that we've worked on over the last decade and more, is find efficiencies where we can that makes the most sense. Sean has mentioned at several meetings, we need to find that sweet spot between what is the best bang for the buck without regulatory overreach and undue cost. So that's kind of the quick update on where we are with our proposal, which basically falls down. There's 92, I believe, 94%, Jason, properties in the watershed inspection program area are residential. The remaining 6 are commercial. We don't know how many of those properties are on holding tanks or how many have those advanced treatment systems. But as a part of our outreach, when we start to kind of get a hold of these people, if this program does move forward, those people would inform us of such. They would provide that documentation, and then we could find those efficiencies. So Ken, that's a kind of a quick update on where we are with the cost savings and what we're looking at for potential fees. So I guess I would ask if anybody has any questions or comments, and we can go from there. Okay, lively group, I like it. And I think we lost Ken too. Okay.
Dave, while you're trying to find Ken,
There he is.
okay, just a quick question about different types of commercial systems. What about the large group shared systems that some HOAs have? Where would they fall?
Yeah, actually, Ken Parker brought that up not a long time ago either. That's another population that we do not know exactly where they are within the watershed. What Joe and Roger and Jason have been working on recently is reaching out to DEC to find out what the quote PCI, the private commercial industrial systems are around Lake George. We have the List Soil and Water did a project back about 12 years ago, going through the DEC files, trying to determine what they had for seeker permits, or speedies permits rather, for those types of systems. And we're building upon that. And we're kind of moving forward with a better understanding of what those kind of commercialized systems are in the basin. What we don't have a record of, nor does DEC that we can identify, is Ken Parker was describing his situation when he lived up in Boone Bay, where multiple properties were on one residential kind of private shared system. And to this day, we haven't really talked about how those properties would be either billed under the program or how they would be inspected. So that's going to be an ongoing conversation, Walt. That's very timely because we're talking about it daily.
Okay.
I'd like to add something to that. Could I?
Sure.
It might help. I mean, I do run one of those exact systems, and it's a small one. There are only 8 people in it, 8 homes in it right now, and we will be expanding. We do have a speedies permit. So we are, as I read the regulations, I was thinking the same thing. Well, we sort of would fall under the way we've written it, that we are a regulated system or permitted and so on. I pay the permit fee every year. But the thing that I know very well is that there isn't a lot of government oversight over what we do. I know the operation, I know what we do here, but no, I don't think anybody has to do that. And I was thinking similar to the way we run marinas and in our boat inspection program, where we insist that they follow certain rules. We dish out the rules that they have. If they are a certain kind of a system and they agree to do that, and I would think that still has to be Lake George Park Commission oversight to make sure each year or every 5 years or something that we're taking a look at them and making sure they're doing it. Then that might help, okay, for some of these ones that are in between. And it just was a thought that I had. let's not walk away from them as if they're doing everything just because they're supposed to be regulated or permitted, because I don't think we have that assurance.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill.
Yep.
Anyone else, ideas, issues on the kind of the cost basis or any of these more community-based systems? Any other thoughts?
Dave, I had
Chris?
put my hand up. Thanks. I want to thank you guys for the effort on this and the time. I know that I reached out and spoke because I fall in the category of having an ETU, and we do have that inspected every year. And I think number one, that would save costs to me. Thank you. But I think it would also save resources from your office, not having to schedule that and go. And one question I did have, the $50 a year, is this program including a pump out, or would that be scheduled through the commission, or is that something that the homeowners schedule once an inspection is set up?
The current way that we're looking at it is that we would reach out to 1/5 of those 2,800 properties every year and say, this is your year, and please go forth and set up your pump out for any time that you'd like. Give the commission 5 days notice, and we will ensure that someone will be there to do the inspection. I think the challenge, I think that system will probably work based on some other folks that we've talked to. I think the challenge is going to be the one that Dave Hatton runs into quite often, which is they would arrive at a site and the distribution box isn't uncovered, or the septic tank itself isn't uncovered, and the hauler is going to have to spend 2 hours trying to find it. That's going to burn a fair amount of time. So we're going to try to be very clear, like the towns are, to say when when the commission is ready to arrive for an inspection, we're hoping that that site will be prepared and ready to move forward. That's kind of one of the challenges, but we kind of know that going in, and hopefully we're going to try to minimize it.
Great. And I'd just like to offer, a few years ago, I know Soil and Water did it, but we also had done an extensive review of DEC and the Speedies permits around. So I'd be glad to share some of that with you. Sometimes there are conditions on those do require a licensed operator to sign off or certify them, which may also help your program as well. So as you develop your database, just note the type of permit, the Speedies permit, and whether there are conditions on a requirement of a certification or not. That could help you out.
Yeah, that'd be helpful, Chris. I'll ask Joe to reach out to you and see if we can kind of get what you have and correlate that with what we have. That would be helpful. I think Ginger, you had the question?
Yeah, I just have a question sort of from a technical standpoint. So if a homeowner, and Chris probably knows a lot more about this, but if a homeowners association, I know they have a Speedies permit, and they're the DEC or whoever comes and inspects the main parts of it on a regular basis. But I'm assuming each homeowner throughout the association, I'm thinking of Arcady actually, which has quite a number of homes. I don't think anybody goes to the actual homes and finds out what's going on between when the septic leaves the house until it gets up to the communal system. And I don't even know if there's a tank at the house where it's stored. Chris, what is the story there?
You put me on the spot, Ginger. I actually,
sorry.
I don't recall whether they have a individual septic tanks or whether they pump to a communal septic tank. I forget on that one. Apologize.
No, that's fine. I just think that if it's only being inspected at the place where it's all collected, if there was something wrong with the lines at the house, or if there are tanks there, I mean, it does seem like there needs to be some oversight further toward the houses, maybe.
You raise a good point, Ginger, that, again, the septic tanks have to be sized to the number of bedrooms. And, that could be a good checking point, obviously, depending on the type of system that there is.
Let me clear up some mystery. The word DEC, visit and inspection, doesn't always exist. We own property in at Boone Bay Association, which consisted of 9 different dwellings, a couple of them year-round, mine and another, and the rest were seasonal. We had a speedies permit, common septic for 8 of the 9. And the 9th one was separate, but it did go into our leach field. Never once in the years that we owned that property did DEC. And I was an officer, either myself or my wife, almost all those years. Never did DEC visit the site for septic inspection or conversation or hello, how are you? There used to be a speedies permit there, and I don't know if it still exists or not. I've been away from there for quite a while, but there is no DEC inspection of speedies permitted homeowners associations that I'm aware of. So we're starting from zero with these folks.
For what it's worth, by the way, my name is Peter Cudan, and I'm president of Village Estates Homeowners Association. And we're very similar. We're a community of 20 lots. We have a common system. And to answer one of the questions is all the sewage lines come from the units to a common pumping area, and then are pumped up to a second area to the tanks, and then out into the leach field. And we have not been inspected. I've been president for 10 years now. We have not been inspected in the entire time that I'm there, but we do it ourselves annually. For what it's worth, we have a list of the things we want checked, and we have it done every year. We check the sludge, top and bottom, make sure that it's functioning properly.
Any other thoughts on this topic before we move on? I don't see any. Ken, we can roll into the next topic if you like.
It's all yours.
Okay. Let me see item number 3, letters to property owners. So most of the people on this call are aware that the commission, one of our primary goals is to do as much outreach as possible to get the best public feedback that we can. Towards that end, we actually mailed letters to 2,800 property owners, the owners that would be within our watershed inspection area as proposed, which is 500 feet from the lake shore and 100 feet from DEC regulated streams. And so here's what we got back so far. We got several people called and said, kind of as the previous gentleman did, telling us about their system, whether it's been inspected or not, or most of those calls came back fairly positive, saying, I think this is an important thing to do. And then on the other side of it, we got a number of letters back generated by the Lake George Residents United, which is a kind of a property rights group around the Lake George area. I'm not sure their leadership, but they've been actively involved in some of the long-term efforts of towns for their long-range planning and other regulatory initiatives. So they are not in support of this activity. They challenged the commission on our authority to move forward in this direction and some of the bases of our background and science behind it, which is fine. So I've responded individually to every single person that has reached out to me via email. And I took their original email and I offered my perspective on their thoughts, which went back out to all the Residents United folks. And then we got a second slew of comments that came back to the commission, and I'm addressing those one by one. One gentleman, we went back and forth a few times, and then he said, listen, at the end of the day, I think less is more. That's where I stand. I said, I can certainly respect that. That's perfectly fine. So I don't think that it's going to be our job to try to change people's minds if they've had them made up on whether there's value in this program or not. But it is our goal to make sure that people are forming their opinions on the best basis of information that they can. And it's incumbent certainly on the commission staff and our commissioners to try to get the word out as best as possible. But we're hoping that as people come across your radar as well as members of the committee and members of the public, that you can kind of at least inform them of your experience so far And if they have detailed questions, always just direct them to the office and we'll try to handle those as best as possible. So we've said since day one, our goal was not to be preaching to the choir. We wanted a cross section of people that have experience in septic systems from the technical side to the business side, and let it go where it goes. And this was not an unexpected outcome that we were going to get 30 to 40 letters come back saying, I oppose this operation. Some of them were well thought. Some of them were simply a response where it says, please add your name and reply forward. That was most of them. And that's fine. I think we're going to do our best. I offered to set up a Zoom call with Lake George Residents United and try to provide some information to them, and then they could form their opinions after that. I haven't heard back on that quite yet, but we know that's just a known commodity going in, and we're happy to respond to those questions as they come in. So that's our current outreach. We're going to continue it. And we haven't even, well, we just started the formal process that Carla's going to talk about in a minute, but we're going to continue on the outreach, because if people don't know what we're doing, they're going to suspect something nefarious, and that's never been the case. So any questions, thoughts, comments on our outreach effort so far?
I'm shocked that people are, they're opinionated.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
There we go. Carla, are you in the background there? I don't see you on my little tiny screen.
I am here.
Okay,
I'm here.
thank you. Hello. You are the next steps at number 4.
I am. Thank you. I've been in the background, as Ken said, listening to all you very smart people talk technical, having no idea what you were talking about, basically. So now it's my turn to tell you about things that you may not be aware of. And just kind of to bring you through the process going forward, now that this group has put together the technical information, what legally has to occur. And unfortunately because we are a state agency, it's not as simple as, for example, the town of Queensbury, the town board presents a local law, they have a public hearing in a couple of weeks, and then it's passed. It would be great. It's not nearly that simple. So to start off with, what the Park Commission did at its last meeting in January, it adopted lead agency designation for the project under the State Environmental Quality Review Act. It approved Part 1, declared lead agency. That Friday, the 28th, it sent out the lead agency letters to all of the involved agencies, including DOH, DEC, the local municipalities. What happens next is that all those folks have 30 days to decide whether or not to allow us to be lead agency. I cannot imagine anyone's going to want to take lead agency of our regulations, but we have to statutorily give them the 30 days. After that time, what we're anticipating is at the March meeting, going through the Part 2 and Part 3 and determining and having the commission determine by taking a hard look at the environmental impacts that this project would perhaps have. And it'll go through the Part 2s and Part 3 and make a determination whether there won't be a significant impact or there will be. If they decide there is not a significant impact, seeker is done at that point, we issue a negative declaration and we move on. If they decide there is going to be a major impact, then we move on further into the seeker process, which is a little more complicated. It goes through a scoping process. There have to be public hearings, there's finding statements, there's which will extend for a number of months until you get to the point where the program anything is sufficiently mitigated. After seeker is done, and I'm going to just presume, just for argument's sake, we get to the point that the commission determines there's no real negative environmental impact. Now we get to start what's known as the SAPA process. SAPA, the State Administrative Procedure Act, many of you know from just the past couple of years, going through the Park Commission with our stormwater regulations, our stream corridor regulations, we have to go through and follow a very specific and highly technical process to get agency regulations approved. That involves preparing a number of specific statutory statements. There's a regulatory impact statement. There is a job impact statement. There is a rural area flexibility analysis statement. There is you have to prepare the actual regulations. You have to prepare summaries of everything. You have to prepare the seeker forms and send those out as well. There is a regulatory flexibility analysis. All of these are statutory, and what they do is they really deal with the impact of the regulation on either the general public, on the rural area. How can a rural area really work with regulations? Will this create more jobs or less jobs? Will it have any job impact? Is it going to be overly burdensome on people? Is it going to be overly costly for either the state or the community? All of these analyses go into effect, and the commission staff is responsible for preparing all of this analysis. Once that analysis is prepared, and I hope you haven't fallen asleep yet, but once that analysis is prepared, we then have to, with the regulations, send it to the state, and we're sending it to a specific area of the state, the regulatory reform unit. This is before any of you get to see the regulations. DEC will review them and DOH will review them because they are required under statute to approve these regulations. Once we get all that, we send it down to the regulatory reform unit in Albany. They look at it. They send it to the governor's office. They look at it. They send it to the Division of Budget. They look at it. It comes back to the regulatory reform unit. They say, you're good to go at that time, which could take anywhere from a few weeks to a year or so, depending on how Albany goes, if it's budget season, if there's other things going on in Albany. We can't control that time period. Once they get that back to us, though, we have the opportunity to then publish it, and then you get to see the actual language of the regulations. Then you have 2 months to look at them and to provide comment before the commission has a hearing. Commission has the hearing. Everyone is fine with it. We don't need to change it. Within the next month or so, the commission can adopt the regulations. This entire process, like I said, could take a year or more. If you remember the stormwater regulations, they sat in Albany for a year at least, trying to just get some attention from them and to go through everything. I'm hoping, I think staff is hoping, I know Dave is hoping that we can get this through a little quicker. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're looking at a 2023 implementation. So all of that being said, and I'll take any questions if anybody has any questions, but all of that being said, part of the concern that we have felt from the public in the past is that why can't we see the regulations? Why can't I see the actual language? Well, it's not that the commission doesn't want you to see it. If we could, we'd give it to you, as soon as it was done. We cannot statutorily give it to the public until the governor's office says you can do so. So we can't give the actual regulations, but we can give, like the commission has in the past, we can have workshops. We can talk about it at meetings. We can do what we're doing here and tell you the substance of it, tell you what really we're thinking of it, just not the actual language. And my understanding is that the commission intends on doing that, intends on continuing the transparency and showing where we are and what we need to do, so that once you actually see and the public sees the actual language, there's absolutely no surprises. You see the words the and the words a and the words, this is a plural and that's not. And this is where in the regulation it is, and that's what number it is. That's all going to be the difference. So ultimately, there is a process, and I know I kind of gave you a lot of facts, but I wanted you to understand and be able to tell anyone who asks, why is this taking so long? There's time periods, and the attorneys that are on the call know this. There are time periods that you have to abide by, and you just can't push them along. And with Albany, you can't push it along too much because you want their approval. Just like you don't go to a judge and say, where's my decision? If you want a decision in your favor, you don't go to the governor's office and say, where's my regulations? So Dave, I think that's what you were looking for in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Thanks, Carla. Anybody have any questions on the process? It's a little complicated, but I think she laid it out pretty well. Chris?
Thanks, Carla. I appreciate it. And yeah, it is time consuming, isn't it? I get a couple questions I had. First off, you'd mentioned a 30-day period for agency comment in the beginning, and I'm just wondering if just because of the short month of February, you're only going to have 28 days between meetings. So is that a problem?
Well,
I'm completely supportive. I just want to make sure there's nothing that may lead to something getting overturned. So.
And that's the number one thing always on my mind, as you can imagine, Chris. But no, that's why we're not looking at it at the February meeting.
Oh.
And we're looking at it at the March meeting.
Okay,
Yep.
gotcha. I'm sorry. I forget what month I'm in sometimes. And then secondly, and I appreciate you touching on the regulations and that they can't be seen, but is there legal grounds for people saying, well, how can you make an environmental determination if you cannot see the regulations and you don't know what the regulations really are? And I appreciate the transparency with the workshops that have always been put on, but does that open up any legal challenges if people can, I mean, legitimately, can they say, well, we haven't seen the regulations, so how can you actually say that there's any environmental or no environmental impact?
So that's a good question, Chris, and one that we have dealt with before. One of the reasons that you start the secret process, and it's a little backwards, but the cases do say you start the secret process now and you finalize the secret process before you actually show the public the regulations. In the event, as you know, there has to be a public hearing with respect to the SAPA process. In the event during the SAPA process, something comes to light that would change what the determination would be for a negative declaration, for example, the commission has the right to reopen seeker at that point and start that process and issue a pos deck and then go forward with scoping. It is backwards. And there are a lot of municipalities that don't, because it's backwards, it doesn't make a lot of sense, so they don't follow it. But there's case law out there that says you have to do seeker, then you do the SAPA. And yes, if you have to reopen seeker, you reopen seeker. Between all of us here, Chris, I agree with you. It should all be done at the same time and after you've seen the regulations. But one of the reasons that we presented the concept paper with this is that that's the substance of it. So really the regulations won't be a surprise. But yeah, there's always the possibility, Chris, that somebody comes back and says, this got to be changed. And the commission says, you know, you're right. Now we have to reopen seeker.
On the second page of the agenda, you'll see the summary framework of the program. That was also sent out in a little bit more detail to the municipal officials around Lake George. And we offered to go to every town board meeting and talk about the issue individually. So I think between the concept paper, the individual items that we've identified, that is 95% of what we're going to be ultimately talking about. There's a few details, some nuance in the definitions that we're proposing, but this is pretty much it. From the average person's understanding, you can get a pretty good feel for what we're proposing, just in the information that's actually on our website right now. Dave Floyd, I thought I saw your hand up. Yep.
Carla, at what point do we have the public hearings?
The public hearings don't happen until the governor's office tell us that we can release the regulations to the public. Once they tell us that, what we do is submit the notice of proposed rulemaking and all of the documents I talked about, plus the text of the rule. It goes on our website, it gets published in the state register, and then the public has 60 days in which they can review the documents. And then after the 60 days, the commission can have a public hearing.
And we want to do it later in the summer when most of the part-time residents are here. Is that correct?
So we actually discussed this with staff. As you know, we're all sitting here in our own either bedrooms or offices, and some of us could be in Florida, some of us could be in Lake George. The good thing about being able to do virtual meetings is that we're not, buttonholed into the summer anymore. We can do a hybrid meeting, so to speak, because it's very unlikely, would be fabulous, but very unlikely that the governor's office will be able to give us approval of all of this in time by May, ultimately, is what we would be asking for, when we can't even finalize seeker until March. So I just don't think that that's going to happen in the summer. However, let's say we do it in the fall and the governor's office has rescinded the state of emergency. So all of you good folks, the commissioners, have to be present in the same room, but everybody else can be either via Zoom or in person. Then we could have the meeting in October and people could be in Florida or they could be in Lake George. So,
Okay.
I mean, it gives us a little bit more flexibility. It's not ideal, but it's not, it won't stop us.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Kathy, Lumber?
Is it correct to say that the fact that the commission did not follow the requisite SAPA 20 years ago, that was one of the reasons why we met failure in this project? And, the fact that we've done all the background research, the science is there. Is that all part of the State Administration Procedure Act that we have followed? And another thing is, my other question is, I don't understand, after going through the resolution that we passed at the meeting last month, how you could ever get a positive deck on a seeker that the purpose of our whole project and our whole basis of what we've been doing for the past year is to enhance and improve and keep the water quality of Lake George where it should be.
So I'll take that question first.
Okay.
The second question first. Under seeker, the commission has to take a hard look. Those are the trigger words, so to speak. Excuse me. And so while we can look at it now and go, well, how can we make this a positive declaration? You do have to go through the different questions on it. And just seeker is very, how do I want to say, it's not just for the environment. You have to do seeker if you're bonding a project. And even if the project has nothing to do with the environment, you're spending money on an action. So you have to look at seeker. So in this case, the question is, well, there is going to be money spent by folks in the Lake George Park and in the management area. So is that a major impact? Is that a minor impact? Can we mitigate that impact? So it's not just we're doing this to protect the environment. I agree with you, Kathy. And as I look at this, I lean towards that. It's likely to not have a major environmental impact, but that's something that the board just has to go through.
Right.
With respect to your initial question, with respect to SAPA, so you don't want to know, 20 years ago, I was a baby lawyer, so I wasn't involved at that point. But my understanding was back then it was an emergency regulation. And Joe Thuan, perhaps if you were talking about this earlier this morning. So it might have been the process on the emergency regulation, and because that's different, that was done improperly and there was no need for it because there was no emergency at that time. We are being very meticulous here and crossing our T's and dotting our I's so that once Albany looks at it, they just give it a stamp and say, you're good to go.
Thank
Does
you.
that answer your
Appreciate
questions?
that. Excellent. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
David Miller, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just wanted to get off mute. Thank you, Dave. Is there an ability, Carla, just for all of us to sort of plan out our advocacy or education or efforts on how different sections you outlined would fall into a timetable? So for instance, if it was a negative declaration,
Mhm.
how long does that analysis of the regulatory impact take, or any mitigations to go? Once it goes to the governor's office, it has to go through multiple agencies. Is that take, and I know it varies because of different issues, but does it take 30 to 60 days? Are we looking at a fall public hearing and draft regulations to the public so we could gear up support for it? So I'm just thinking like a straw timeline for all of us to plan our activities, especially from interest groups like the council, to support the effort and help it move forward.
Absolutely, Dave. And that's something that we definitely need to do. And obviously it does change, but if we go it like this, we have a negative declaration in March.
Right.
At that point, we're hoping probably by April to have all of our statements done, all of the analysis done, the text of the rule, the summary of the rule, everything ready to go to Albany. At that
Okay.
point, we can submit it to Albany. And then unfortunately, Dave, it's out of our hands.
Right. Okay.
Because
Well, that's good to know. That's what I was thinking of.
yes.
If April, May is the time it's going to Albany, then you can plan from there depending on how long it takes from Albany.
That's and Dave, Dave Wick, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of the timeline we were discussing earlier this morning. You know, kind of best case scenario, the shortest timeline. Once it gets to Albany, I mean, we could get lucky. It'll be in Albany after the budget. So budget hopefully will be passed. They won't have to deal with anything on the budget and they can focus on this. The stream corridor ones went fairly quickly. The storm water ones they were in Albany for a year. So, and that was with us calling and emailing like every other day, or, you know, trying to get it back in front of everyone. So once you get it back from Albany though, then there is a timeline, Dave. You get it back from Albany, we get it in the state register. It takes 2 weeks to get in the state register. You put it in on a Tuesday, then you have to wait 2 weeks and it goes in the 2 weeks after that. And then you count your 60 days until you have a hearing. So let's, you know, I think we're looking at a fall at earliest to do the public hearings. And then honestly, once the public hearing is done and there's no changes, you wait a month till the next board meeting, they adopt it. We then submit it back to Albany. They don't have to approve it. It's been approved already. It's been approved by the commission. Bruce signs a certification and it goes into the registry and it could be in effect, by the end of the year. That is best case scenario, I would think. Dave Wick, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
One last question on that. Does it go to APA at the end of the process as the storm regs do, or does it not have to go through that process?
APA is not in the statute requiring any kind of approval or anything.
Okay, all
For
right.
DOH and DEC, but we've been working with them this whole time.
Yeah.
And actually I was emailing with DEC's counsel earlier today about this. So they have to approve it, but we're going to get their approval prior to us even sending it to Albany to begin with.
Well, and the other good news is septic system pollution was a priority in the governor's
Absolutely.
state of the state. Okay,
Yep,
thank you. Sorry
absolutely.
it takes so long.
No,
It's helpful.
that's what we're here for.
Good. Thanks, Dave. Lorraine. Unmute, Lorraine. There you go.
Yes, okay. I think my questions are actually for you, Dave. You know, what Carla outlined in terms of the SAPA analysis, you know, it sounds quite heavy, like, you know, job, rural impact, flexibility, burdensomeness, cost, everything like that. But then Carla seems to think that that can be done in 2 months. So I was just wondering how realistic that is, and can the existing staff handle all that?
Yeah, so from my take, if this was happening in July, absolutely not. We happen to be in a perfect time of year for it. We haven't even sent out our boat and dock registrations. Once we do that, it starts to get quite a bit busier, and then summer is a mess. So if we can get our act together to start making this happen in the March timeframe, I think we'll be doing pretty well. We're going to have the assistance of Sean and Carla along the process. you can actually go on our website, I believe, still and find the documentation for the SAPA process for the other regulations for stream corridor and for stormwater, just to get a feel for the depth of content of those things. So I'm pretty confident that we can handle most of that in-house with the assistance of Sean and Carla.
Okay, and I have a second question. It really relates to the previous agenda item. You mentioned that you got some comment letters back. Not all of them were favorable. I think those of us who have been supporting this effort, when we got our letter, we say, oh, great. So would it help to balance the letters if we did send in support letters?
At this stage, not really. I appreciate the thought. What really becomes important is after it goes out to public comment, because that actually is when the clock starts ticking and we start to have to balance. We have to answer every comment that comes in with a response. And then that entire document goes down to the governor's office and our sign-off partners, DEC and Department of Health, to find out if we're on the right track or if we're missing something. It is definitely beneficial to see that there's two sides to the story, because as you know, quite often, if somebody's happy with something, they're not going to do anything about it. If somebody's upset about something, they're going to complain about it.
Right.
That's a pretty well-known issue for all of us. So I even mentioned that to our town supervisors not long ago, saying if you are in support of this effort, I believe some towns have generically supported the idea of commission undergoing septic system inspections. As we get further along in the process and they're more aware of the various components within the program, we may be so bold as to ask them if they can reiterate that support, because they're the elected officials of this watershed, and we think that that support would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Anyone else with questions for Carla, or really anything we've talked about so far, because we're coming to the end of our agenda pretty quickly. Ginger.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind you that most of the towns, well, all the ones in Warren County and Essex County did pass resolutions asking for this. So I don't know whether you mean you want a new resolution or just a letter from those towns, but we do have, I mean, that's a pretty solid statement of support, I think.
And we very much appreciate that. What's interesting is I don't have a copy of any of those. I think they went maybe to the LGA or somewhere else, but we don't have anything on record from any town except for the mayor emails me quite often saying his support. And he also says, by the way, we only have one property in the entirety of the village that's on septic, so we don't really count, but they do support us. So I'm not going to continue to bother them all the time, but once we get a little further down the line, if they still feel the same way about our program, we'd ask them to reiterate that support that they forwarded in their resolution or even an email to that effect would be very helpful.
Okay, I can, if it would be helpful to have them now, I can get you the resolutions.
It would be extremely helpful if you can compile those and send them down. That'd be fantastic. Thanks. I hate to continue to bother the supervisors on things. So
I don't
everybody else
mind
can do it. That'd be great.
I'll do it.
Bob, you haven't spoken yet. I see your hand up.
Need to unmute, Bob.
There you
Can you
go.
hear me? Okay, good. Based on everything I've heard today, what the commission has accomplished to date, and the complexity of what Carla has just described to finally get these regulations put in place, I have a suggestion, and my suggestion is the following. Currently, all of this is being done to affect the property owners that are within 500 feet of the lake and of the streams. Would it be possible to put language into the regulation today that would trigger, let's say, in 2 or 3 years from now, and include properties maybe that go back to 1,000 feet from the lake or 1,500 feet from the lake, but to go back to the well, so to say, and initiate this process again in the future? Can we kind of cut down on that time frame and just put some language into this regulation today to include those other properties in the future?
Carla, why don't you answer the technical side of that first, and then I can speak more programmatically.
Sure. We could put language in there, but generally, Bob, what happens is agencies are required to review their regulations every 5 years anyway. And so that's something we would do. I think what you're talking about is maybe, putting in something saying, okay, in 5 years, for these years, this is the area of the program. And the next 5 years, it expands to this area, and the next 5 years, it expands to this area. I'd have to look, Bob, to be honest. I'd have to look to see if the commission has the authority to kind of do a part and parcel of that, or if that would not be allowed. But in any event, I mean, in order to do to amend it, yeah, you're right. You'd have to do this whole process again. It's a little easier because we've already done it. But like with the stormwater, we'd have to do it all again. Dave, what do you think about technically?
Yeah, Bob, this conversation has actually come up a couple of times. One on the pro side, like it sounds like you might be, and then one on the against side that says, why don't we just simply phase in the program as 100 feet from the lake, and then we could reiterate over time that we go 200 a certain amount of time out, and then 300. So the idea is out there from all sides, and it makes sense. From our perspective, from the management perspective, it would be a little bit more challenging to try to develop a program based on cost that's going to ultimately affect a much larger area. But I think probably more importantly is what we have the ability to do in the next iteration of the regulations is just simply modify. Let's say the commission chose 5 years from now to say, this is important enough for 500 feet, it's important enough for 1,000 feet, and wanted us to move in that direction and take a look. What we'd have to do is justify why the commission found it important to move to that direction. And what the first 5 years of the program does is allows us an entire database of information on our first 5 years of effort to help validate and justify the second set. If we did that stepwise approach in the first set of regulations, we haven't yet found what we're intending to find in the first set. We don't have that level of substantiated justification to go further out into the watershed. So from my perspective, and in talking with John Carr, he was in our office meeting with Ken and I the other day, that stepwise approach makes sense. If we're finding within 500 feet of the lake that we're having substantial issues of failure, breakage, those types of things, then we can extrapolate that into an area that may be a little bit less environmentally concerning, but maybe a little bit more concerning from almost a public health standpoint. So I think from this perspective, I think we have an easy ability to update the regs with new distances in the future without going through the same process that Carla in that level of detail has kind of gotten into. But we still have the benefit of looking at the first 5 years and learning what I think we need to learn before we expand it beyond our current area. So that was long-winded, but that's kind of the general idea. Kathy. You're on mute, Kathy.
I think I can bring this up now. I was kind of waiting for the other items, but it kind of has something to do with what Bob was just asking and how you explained it. Before I continue, I didn't get a chance to check in the 25-page concept paper. Did the end of that paper deal with maintenance and reporting? Because I know that we did a summation of what we've been doing. And I wanted to, there was something in there on maintenance and reporting, which kind of goes along, I think, along those lines as far as inspecting farther upstream. The first says all septic systems in Lake George Basin need to be pumped out by a septic hauler at least once every 5 years, except that septic systems servicing seasonal residences located outside the wastewater inspection program area must be pumped out at least once every 10 years. Well, first of all, outside the wastewater inspection program area, would you please tell me if that is still inside the Lake George Basin?
Yeah, what the intent, and that's actually in the regulations, the draft regulations, Kathy. We haven't vetted that much
Okay,
further.
then I will stop.
It's simply a conversation, but
Okay.
The idea is, Joe and I were talking about it not long ago, is there's value to having people understand that septic tanks need to be pumped out. And so what we put in there floated as an idea is that all septics need to be pumped out within a certain date, whether you're in the program or not. If you live in Lake George Park, you should have your septic pumped out every so often. And Joe and I are currently, we haven't even talked to Ken about this yet, currently landing on a potential 10-year time frame where, because there's a lot of properties in the watershed that are seasonal in nature, don't get some of the use that some other more utilized systems may. So it's something that we're kind of kicking around as a possibility. But as we always talk about, the crux of the program is going to be within the inspection area. And that's what we really want to focus on right now, is getting that 95% of the gain by getting a program on the ground that makes sense, that works, that's publicly supportable. And then those other fringe opportunities, we think we can pull in as needed and necessary. But we're going to continue those conversations, Kath, as we go.
Okay, then I'm not even going to comment anymore. I can wait till the future. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Tom Jarrett, you haven't said anything quite yet.
This goes toward supporting the program, and obviously those of us who have participated in this ad hoc committee are in support of the program. So I imagine you may be reconvening this committee back when the public hearing process and the public comment process is undertaken. We could also provide some specific technical comments and assistance depending on what public comments you get. So you may want to reach out to any number of us that are willing to help.
Yeah, I think that would be valuable. And Ken and I are going to talk about that when we get closer. What we're hoping to have is kind of a multi-pronged presentation when we get to that point, where it would be someone like myself introducing the topic, maybe talking with Sean to highlight a few of the important points, and then bringing in someone that, Sean is, he's a consultant of ours, and getting an outside perspective from someone on the committee, perhaps like yourself, Tom, that could highlight your experience. You've been designing septics for a very long time, working in this industry. I think there's value in doing so. So what we'd like to do is show people in that process that, it was the commission's endeavor the entire time to get a broad spectrum of people involved with knowledge and experience in the topic. And that this wasn't simply 10 people in a room saying, we really think this is important to do, and we're going to shove it down people's throats. So yeah, we'd very much welcome that opportunity there, Tom. Chris Novitsky, it's your hand up.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. I wanted to echo, I know that there was discussion last month or last meeting that we had on concerns about trying to get more properties in. I just wanted to again echo for that. I know there were a couple commissioners and others on the public. Secondly, it was referenced about the summary, and that would be something that you could point to as you go forward to inform people of the highlights of the program, not being able to give them the regulations. And I'm still concerned about item 1A, which refers to, again, having the structures within 100 feet of the DEC stream. Again, I think we could be missing septic systems for that. And I believe that one of the responses might have been Joe Thuin last month said that there was language in the regulations that said if your septic system is within 100 feet of the streams, you're covered. But again, you're not going to see the regulations. So I want to make sure, again, I would advocate to have that much greater than 100 feet to DEC streams. So if your structure is, 150 feet or so, that you're within this program, because as we know, septic systems are typically down gradient from a home. And if it's 100 feet from a stream or 150 feet from the stream, you have to have your system 20 feet from the house, and it can be so big. So it can still extend into that, 100-foot buffer. So I would hope that we can get that looked at so that it would be tighter and make sure that we capture all those systems. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, Jason looked at, I continue to bother Jason with GIS questions. If we were to go out to 200 feet along streams, what would that add? It wasn't a significant number of houses. And everything that we have to do, of course, is going to be balancing the identified need with the public impact. And so we have to make that decision, and it's not mine to make, but ultimately it's going to be the committee's and then ultimately the commission. So I can't speak to that. In terms of your question on the outreach and the summarization to the general public, Jason was kind enough to put together an FAQ for the idea of the program that we have so far, starting very basically with what is a septic system and kind of going down through what the commission is currently proposing. It's right on the commission's septic page. Take a look at your convenience. And we're going to keep trying to push if people can understand 75% of what the program is about in a page or less, I think we're doing pretty well. Other questions, comments? Bill Mason.
Dave, just relating to that, I just want a clarification and following up with what Chris was saying. In the bullet point 1A, it says inspections of residential and commercial structures. And I'm a little unclear. We have had discussions that we're using the structure, the building, in order to kind of identify them. But then we talked, and I don't know if it's still this, that if any of the septic structures are within the 500 feet, we will identify them and they will be part of our, part of the program, part of the regulated systems. Is that correct?
My current understanding, and Joe can correct me if I'm wrong, we're using the house as the proxy for the septic system. So if your structure is within the 500-foot mark, you're going to get a letter. And if Bill Mason's structure is within 500 feet, but your entire septic is outside of 500 feet, you can identify that to the commission, then you'd be exempted from the program.
Right. But the reverse of that, if your house is 500 feet away or 600 feet away, but your septic system is found to be within the 500 feet, because I remember we had that discussion that we decided that it wasn't the pipe from the house, but it was the septic tank or the drain field. If any part of that was within the 500 feet, then that is a regulated system that falls under our control, and it will be difficult to identify, but as we go forward, that is the system and the regulations will state that. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Joe in a second. I think our challenge up front would be to identify those. If we're not sending them a letter, we're not considering them part of the program. We'd have to have somebody say, sure, the house is at 550 feet, but their septic tank is at 490 feet or something like that. So that'd be a challenge, but I see Joe has unmuted. He must have something good to say.
Yeah, you're right, Bill. So the regs, the draft regs speak to the location of the wastewater system. What we're citing as the structure, again, is just a practical application. So when we're looking at a 20-acre lot, Jason looks at the development area and says, all right, is that anywhere close to the CEA we're looking at? Or are we, he found we grabbed like 400 extra parcels just because the parcels are so big. The development footprint wasn't anywhere close to the CEA. So yes, what the regs will cite will be the location of the wastewater system. And we might miss some on either side, and we'll learn as we're doing inspections.
Right. Thank you. So I would agree with Chris. I think that 1A, you should think about adding a word. It says inspections of residential and commercial structures. I think it should say residential and commercial septic structures within 500 feet of Lake George, just so that anybody reading this document knows that's where we're heading. And that is more transparent and more clear that that's what we're trying to do. And I don't know if I'm not an editor and I'm not a wordsmith, but I think that would help, that there is a little bit of lack of clarity there. And okay, thank you.
I could this is, by the way, this document is simply for your general information. There's nothing regulatory about it. I could say structures with systems within 500 feet. That's an easy switch that we can certainly make. But again, this is just general information. It's not the language of the regs.
But you've sent this document out to the towns already, right?
Correct.
And so this is sort of a public document, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So then people will be using it. And good point, Chris. Thank you.
We don't ever tell Chris he has good points. Just not what we do. Who else?
Hearing none.
Okay, that's all I have, Ken, unless anybody Yeah.
I can give you a snow report. It's snowing in Queensbury. I can see it out of a couple, 3 windows. And I'm going to do what I always enjoy doing and have been doing for the last 8 or 9 months. And that's to say sincerely to each and every one of you, thank you for putting up with this. Recently, somebody in discussion with Dave and I said, well, what's the future of the Ad Hoc Committee? Will they be disbanding the gang? And we were total agreement immediately. Absolutely not. Yeah, this isn't over yet. And we would not be anywhere near where we are if it hadn't been for this group right here, just hammering out the ideas, another 50 sets of eyes or whatever the numbers have been. And it's really, truly appreciated. And, I'd like to hand you all a little badge and a silver cup or something, but that ain't going to happen today. So with that, I tell you, if you're driving, drive home carefully, please. And we'll see you soon.
Very good. Thanks, Ken. Have a good day,
Great,
everyone.
thanks, everybody. Thanks for letting us be part of it.